Hey guys, we are going over the Syrian civil war, somewhat of its history, as well as the current geopolitical ramifications of what's going on and what has happened, historically speaking. Now, when we look at this conflict, which has lasted, according to the great source known as Wikipedia, from March 15th of 2011 to now, meaning that it's been going on for about 9 years. What we see in this, honestly, is that we have multiple sides fighting over a landmass probably smaller than Texas, easily smaller than Texas, I should add. And the fact still remains that while we have spent billions of dollars in this area, we have not gotten what we've wanted necessarily out of this. Now, let's look at what the partisan control of the land is. When we click here, we have the Syrian government under Bashar Al Assad, right? And we have the Syrian Democratic Forces, the YPG, which is with the Kurds, those commie Kurds, the ones that have women in their ranks. These guys have hostage a ton of ISIS people. So it's completely vital that they keep their sovereignty in respect to the Bashar al-Assad government so that they don't take thousands of ISIS soldiers and let them loose by accident. Then we have the intervention of the Turks by Recep Erdogan. That guy, proto-dictator. He is technically a prime minister in Turkey, but this guy is a pretty severe nationalist, and he did invade this part of Syria, and in particular he did this, in fact, because he wanted to millions of refugees have come out of this war, which in fact was one of the biggest travesties of the war, to be fair. And even the United States of America has taken in tens of thousands of these refugees. In fact, I know a couple of them myself here in southwestern America. There's even Syrians here. I don't like them, they barely speak English, but that's what's happened. And the refugee crisis has been even worse in places like Greece, with an already shattered economy, Italy, Germany in particular, and it has caused a whole movement of nationalism in Europe, like in Hungary, to be emboldened as for them to build a fence and a wall to keep these refugees out. And basically, Turkey had about 2 to 3 million Kurds and Syrians in this general area, and they wanted to offset that and put them over here and try to secure funding from the West to fund the maintenance of the refugees here and for them to not go into Europe, because that would be bad. And what you see with the refugee crisis is that they increased rapes in Sweden by 5 times in a couple of years, which means that those Muslim immigrants, or refugees to be completely honest, are like 100 times more likely to rape or something than Swedish men, which is kind of crazy to me. I don't know about that statistic, but it is vaguely true. And we do have other partisans within here. We have the anti-government U.S.-backed rebels, which in fact Donald Trump is not really helping too much, but the main intent of the U.S. presence here in southeastern Syria is to maintain oil field dominance, as to not fund the Bashar al-Assad government too much and have leverage over the country. That's simply why we have it there, okay? Now, if we were to look at this purple stripe right here, this is the Golan Heights, which was opportunistically taken by Israel. Israel, in particular, was notorious for their wars against Syria, and Syria invading Israel multiple times. So we do have a tried and true conflict. And when we look at Beirut right here, very important geostrategically on the Mediterranean, though in the news recently for a bombing or whatever that was. When we look over here, we have Tartus. Tartus is important too. The Russians are allied with Bashar al-Assad in key point so that they could have a Mediterranean naval base that is allied to them. So they basically are more or less allied with Turkey. They flow through Istanbul, and then they go all the way over here, Tartus. So they have this naval base, all this, and they want to project onto here in Europe. So that's a problem for NATO and Europe and Americans, Western influence. That's a big problem. Now, when we look up here, we have anti-government Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, National Liberation Front, and other Turkish-backed jihadis. So the Turks aren't innocent, and just like a lot of these Muslim countries, they have jihadists that have a religious motivation as for their killing of people and sequestration of land. We have the Turkish army emboldening proxy people of Syria to fight against Bashar Al Assad, and this is in particular the case because you have to get the alliance structure in place. We have Iran, which is allied with Assad's government in Syria, and we have Iran, Russia, and Syria in a three-way alliance. And then in Baghdad, because Obama pulled out of Iraq too fast, apparently the Shia majority of Iraq, which is 65% of their population there, seized the power from the Sunni president, I think appointed by George W. Bush, or supported by, and Saddam Hussein, who was a secular Sunni leader. That establishment force lost power and largely is in seclusion, whereas the Shia-backed proxies funded by Iran are there to serve the need of this three-way alliance. Now you can count Iraq as a fourth proxy state, as they are used particularly with the highways near Mosul to transport equipment from Iran to Syria, as well as money. I think in this overall course of the war, Iran has spent several billions of dollars. I think I saw a figure of 87 billion in particular to fund the Syrians. So very big. When you look at how Donald Trump killed Hakeem Soleimani, or whatever his name was, the leader of the Quds Force. Well, in fact, the Quds Force is like the Marines, but in Iranian terms. And they are a substantial branch of their military that tend to go on foreign expeditions or focus on other issues such as that, and send volunteer troops to places like Syria and fight ISIS, but also fight U.S.-backed rebels as well. So while they are helping us in destroying ISIS, it also is only because of their own interest, okay? So not for a second do you think that Bashar Al Assad is our guy or Putin is our guy. They're just working for themselves. And frankly, that's okay, but when they infringe on our interest, then we have a problem, okay? So let's go into the handling of Syria. When you look at the war itself, part of this originated from the instability caused by Bashar al-Assad taking power, because as you know, a lot of dynasties have political turmoil, as in, for example, Bashar al-Assad's father right here, Hafez, died, I believe, in around 2000 or, close to that time, and Bashar al-Assad was relatively young to take power. I think he took power in his late 30s. Normally you should get power in your 50s, but clearly that didn't work out well. So the point is that Bashar al-Assad, who was a doctor before this, wasn't really ready to become the dictator, or whatever you call it, of Syria, which clearly summoned instability. Add in the fact of the Arab Spring, which Obama didn't stop. You see Obama fumbling the ball in Egypt. You see him fumbling the ball in a myriad of places, frankly. We include the Muslim Brotherhood. We look at Gaddafi's overthrow at the behest of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State under Barack Hussein Obama II. And all of this does not result well. And wow, maybe Assad does look out for his people. Clearly, the way that he's done it has not worked. And yes, America has backed rebels, but America did not incite that war directly, okay? It is in America's interest to promote stability, though we would rather have people that are allied with us explicitly. It is clear that we would rather have secular dictators, like in South America, than have democracies that are against our interest or promote instability somehow. Okay, so we go down, and we have this alliance with Putin already set by, I think, 2014, but frankly even earlier, because Putin has been in power for over 20 years. So Russia has intervened for almost 5 years in Syria, and that is to no surprise because they want more power, of course. And when you look at the map, Russia is closer to Syria than is Italy to Egypt. It's about the same distance almost. So that's what we're talking about in terms of distance. America's way far out. You clearly don't have influence, America, in terms of just regional, landmass. So we look at the main belligerents of this war, and we see that we have Syria, Iran and Russia, like I told you guys, and then we have Hezbollah, which I forgot to mention, but that is a Shia group funded by Iran, a subsidiary of the Quds Force under Soleimani before, and Hezbollah particularly has a power hold over southern Lebanon, and they continually attack northern Israel, the Golan Heights, of course, that area. So Hezbollah is an anti-Western force, anti-Jew force, whatever you want to call it. So that's bad. We have interim government, which is the government under the Syrian opposition, basically, which is, you could call it more democratic, but that's not what I care about right now. We have ISIS, of course, under al-Baghdadi, which Trump killed. Well, the dog did, but whatever. Yes, and then we go on and on. Turkey joined the war in 2019, I believe, so they weren't important until then almost. And when we look at the casualties, we see about 150,000 for the Syrian opposition, and we have about, 130,000 Assad killed. So pretty even. ISIS 40,000 killed. Pretty big stuff. But if we look at the U.S. soldiers that died, 13 died. So when people say, "Oh, Trump has to pull out of Syria," well, you can argue that for other reasons, but clearly only 13 Americans died in the several years we've been there. Only 13 have died. As a comparison, more people die in Chicago in any given Saturday probably than do a year in Syria in that wear an American flag, right? Now, a lot of these casualties are accidents, of course, so while obviously 13 deaths is too many, but come on, it's exaggerated. And then we look over here. The most important amount of people that we're going to look at here is not the people that died, but the 7.6 million people internally displaced, so homeless people, and over 5 million refugees from Syria. This is huge. Where the hell are you going to put these guys? Surely a couple million can fit in Turkey, right here in the south, but that doesn't clearly work when you have millions coming over here. Okay, so that's a complete mess. And a lot of the problems that Sweden has, in particular with crime and other things like welfare, is derived exactly from this war. And the fact that Bashar Al Assad has not been able to completely clamp down on everything has enabled more people to leave, which is not good, either way you slice it. Now, when you look at the population of the country, it is pretty divided, actually. You have half of them being Arabs. You have 15% Alawite Christians, Alawite Islamic Shias, which are partnered with the Iranians. And then you have 10% of the population, which is Kurd, which is this part. And then you have 10% Levantine, which is more oriented towards Beirut, this area. And you have a ton of Druze and, Turkmen, Assyrians, Armenians. But most people are still Muslims. And, Assad does get credit for protecting the small minority of like 10% of the country that is Christian, Protestant or Eastern oriented or whatever you want to call it. And in terms of socioeconomic prowess, the GDP per capita was terrible in Syria. They were very poor. In fact, Egypt is richer than Syria, apparently, and that was even before the civil war. So clearly, Bashar al-Assad was not that good to his people in terms of bringing a good economy. So I'm making this video in part because there's a lot of people that like to defend this guy, Assad, but clearly he was not the best leader to begin with. And you could argue, getting rid of him is worse. But also, let's look. He's allied with Iran, which is our enemy. He's allied with Russia, which is our enemy, and he's allied with Iraq, which is another unstable nation right now. And of course, he poisoned his own people or whatever. I'm not even going to go into that. That's not a big deal. To me, that's his own problem. But when you look at the alliances here, we have Saudi Arabia, which is friends with Israel. Israel and Saudi Arabia and Jordan support having the Bashar Al Assad government overtaken. Now, this is important because Jordan gets U.S. aid money, as does Israel, and they are on our side on most issues. Now, they are against Syria, so to contradict both Turkey, France, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, Qatar, whatever, that's a big problem geopolitically and diplomatically as well. So clearly, the political, easy option is not to support Bashar Al Assad, of course. And then you look at the people that support the Syrian government. You have here Iran, Russia, enemies, and then Iraq obviously is a hellhole. You don't know who's in power anyway, so they're not helpful in any case. And then we have Lebanon, which is split, and they're really in the middle of everything over here, surrounded by a lot of countries that are bigger than them. Even Israel's more powerful than Lebanon by a long shot as well, so that's important to know. Clearly, Bashar does not have good friends. That's what I'm going to say. When we look at the type of fighting we get, this is really the most modern warfare there is. A lot of heat-seeking missiles, whatever you call it. And a lot of sectarian, domestic problems in the country. Casualties are high, crime is high, income is going down, employment is obviously going down. Bashar al-Assad is living on a credit card. And yes, there are sanctions that are hurting his economy, but what the hell? He'd be screwed anyway, just like with the Maduro government in Venezuela. So clearly that is really important to understand in terms of what's going on here. The Russians aren't helping the situation much other than helping Bashar al-Assad, but that is all cynical, guys. In politics, we must understand that every single country in its right mind is going to seek its own interest before anything else. So in this case, Turkey is working for itself. America is working for itself for the most part. Iran the same way. And if they're helping somebody, it's not because, oh, I love them. No, it's because it benefits them, of course. So when we look at how many refugees are from the Syrian civil war, we look over here, 3.6 million in Turkey. Look at this, tent city, basically. Very high, ever-increasing numbers, actually. And when you look at when they joined the war, in particular, that's when the refugee level stabled off, because they clearly are spending so much money on housing all these refugees. You have to put them in all these little boxes, because you can't fit them all, right? So you have all these little Syrians that they're ethnically ambiguous to me, but I guess they can blend in with the Turks, right? So you have those, and then you look at the almost 1 million that Lebanon is holding, 600,000 by Jordan. Like I said, they were holding refugees, and Egypt has over 100,000 as well. And then part of the money that we give to Jordan is to help with the Syrian refugees, but clearly the Israelis don't want to take in too many for themselves, because if they were, then they would be taking hundreds of thousands, if not a couple million of the refugees. So clearly they're not helping us out in that, respect. But when we look down, Germany took in about 800,000 refugees. That is pretty big. Even given their population, which is 100 times bigger than this, really, I still believe that that's too many, given the population. So, like, 1% of Germany is refugee at this point. And then, 250,000 in Iraq, which is not proportional for a neighbor to have. Sweden, 122,000. Now, that is insane. I believe the population of Sweden can be no more than, I would say 15 million. So that's a really high percentage. I think that's about 2% of the population or something. I don't know. Yemen, 100,000. Hungary, 72,000. They had to wall them off so that they wouldn't come, of course. Canada has taken in over 100,000. You look at Greece, another 60,000, which is another problem in and of itself. We see Austrian right-wing parties taking power now because of the 45,000 Syrian refugees. Again, you look at the United States, 16,000. Thanks to Donald Trump, he lowered the refugee rate to below. He cut it by 70 to 90%, which is great. But look, Israel's nowhere on this list. And we have places like Argentina with 3,000 and Syria and Israel with none documented. So that's not good. We should, if we're paying them $3.8 billion a year, they should be housing some of these guys, right? And Bashar al-Assad has not put a cap on this, but here he is meeting with Ali Khamenei, right? You might have heard some senators talk about this guy. This guy's not good. No one in Iran is really our guy. They all want to destroy Israel and America the Great, saying those Arabs are insane. They're out of their mind. So, people like to make memes of adoration to Bashar, but clearly he is not a pro-American guy. He's not pro-Western, and I think that if you're not pro-Western, you're not really pro-American, because the whole concept of the nation was built on Western cringe to say liberal, but I suppose they were on, Enlightenment ideals. And while some of them are clearly corrupted over time, most of them are fine, as they were assumed, okay? So, 20 years, he clearly couldn't control his country. He could not put the law and order that we needed in his country for us to not take in tens of thousands of refugees that have no business in America, okay? Now, Obama on Syria. We have a lot of articles to read on this respect, but clearly none of them show Obama doing too well on Syria. When we look in 2014, I believe he did, that he wanted to put in troops, but not only that, so maybe he's the neocon, but he wanted also to impose a red line on Bashar Al Assad to not invade certain parts of Syria and reclaim them to his own, Syria as his property, so to speak. But Obama made a bluff, and Bashar al-Assad called the bluff. Obama did nothing about it. He is scared, and Obama was feckless, and nobody can defend that, because if you're going to be in Syria, actually get the job done. Don't halfway step in it and then pull out. That's retarded, and Donald Trump has done a substantially better job in that respect, okay? Now, let's look at what Donald Trump has been doing. Clear difference. We have Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, whereas last time we had Hillary Clinton or John Kerry, which is even worse in some respects, and Barack Hussein Obama, right? So we have them being tough on Russia. We have them sanctioning Syria, which is good, because we can leverage them. The weaker Bashar is, the more we can leverage everybody supporting him, and the more Iran and Russia will have to cough up money to keep Bashar alive in this war, which is in the interest of the Russians and the Iranians. So that's important, okay? Sanctions don't cost us anything, they just hurt them, because the trade that we used to do with Syria was very minimal anyway, so any pain that we inflict on them is going to be 30 times worse than any that we're going to take ourselves. So clearly that's in Trump's prerogative, okay? And clearly they're not in our benefit. And I can tell you why this isn't in the benefit of the United States, and that is because Donald Trump knows that Erdogan does not have our interest either. Erdogan even, actually, if I were to look this up, Erdogan himself wanted to overthrow Libya in his own image, and he also wanted to buy Russian jets. He also wanted to basically throw those refugees, and he threatened Europe that if they did not pay him money, he would open the floodgates to illegal immigration of those refugees into Bulgaria and other places in Europe, which would screw over the Europeans. So he selfishly did that. And I cannot respect him for being anti-European and for being anti-American. And Donald Trump was smart in threatening huge tariffs. I think it was like a 50 to 80% tariff on steel, which would have crippled Turkey's economy. When we look at Turkish unemployment, you clearly see that he is weak as a president. We're at 13%, and that was in 2019 pre-COVID. So they have worse than Obama levels of unemployment, so Great Recession levels of unemployment, and that's during peacetime. So clearly he is a terrible guy, and he was not our ally as well. So Donald Trump being hard on him was really smart, and I think that, frankly, he set it up so that he would make Erdogan the bad guy, and anything that goes wrong in this general area in northern Syria would be blamed on him. But not only that, but since Turkey was orienting itself and leaning towards the Iranian Russian side, now since he's having to fight the Assad government, now Erdogan gets to be enemies with Russia and Iran, which is perfect because that'll distract our enemies even further than they were before. And Donald Trump has done that without putting in more ground troops. And in fact, he pulled out troops because Erdogan knows not to screw with Donald Trump, and he told them before that I want to invade this northern part of Syria. And Donald Trump said, okay. He pulls out, moves them over here, secures the oil for ourselves, and we get the profit out of that oil. Whereas Assad is starving, and he needs to get fed, which is going to take more material from Iran, more material from Russia, which in case would then be used to fight against Erdogan, and then Erdogan's fight in the north will require more Iranian and more Russian support towards Assad. So again, we're starving out the Russians and we're starving out Iran, which is perfect. And frankly, people don't see the genius in Trump's plan. But not only that, but when we look at how Trump has dealt with other things, you can see that he's really thinking around, a lot of parameters, a lot of borders, ironically. He's really doing 4D chess, as some people say. But yes, so far, and resume, I think that the policy in Syria has been bad overall from, I'd say, 2000 to 2017, but I think when Trump took power, he's been doing things mostly correct. But let me go into the decision of going into Syria. Assuming America did not incite the war in Syria, we did have the right to intervene to the extent that they were hurting other people, and I think that it is in the best interest for a Western-aligned, Europeanized government to take care of Syria, and for a guy who wants to work with the Europeans and with Americans and, be shaped more so in our image. I agree with that, but at the same time, I don't want a full-scale intervention like in Iraq, and I don't think Bashar is as bad as Hussein as well, but at the same time, Bashar winning is bad because Bashar is not liked by his people as much as you'd like. You would have the Kurds resenting him for generations to come. All those refugees would hate Assad, and, you're leaving Assad to the mercy of Israel too. Israel's against Assad, and I think that in our interest, ideally, Assad gets starved to death. We make the Russians and the Iranians pay bigly, and then I don't know what could happen then. I think a friendly government would easily coup Assad and take him over, which is really important, honestly. So either way, I think if Assad wins, we bring stability to the Middle East in this region, but at the expense that he will be a satellite, basically the puppet of Russia and Tehran, So that's bad, but if there is instability, this will make Iran weaker and Russia weaker, which means they're going to be too busy to invade other countries. So either way, I see this having positives and downsides. But yeah, anyway, guys, what do you think about this video? This video was about the Syrian civil war and what's happening, what's going on. Is this really an important issue for America to intervene? What do you think, guys? Comment down below. Do you think that we should ignore this country and let millions of refugees pour all over Europe? Or should we put in a little bit of effort over here and make sure that those refugees stay in here and stay in Turkey? And we close the borders in Europe and we close the borders in the US to keep those refugees that are unvetted out, those potential rapists and other jihadists, which clearly are not in our interest and are not culturally homogeneous with the majorities of any other countries over here besides maybe Bosnia. Anyways, guys, I'm gone. Adios.